They told me I was adopted on my 18th birthday, but I found out first. The letter beneath the floorboards. It started with the rain. Not just any rain, but a heavy, relentless downpour that blurred the windows and soaked the front lawn like the sky had something to mourn. My 18th birthday was supposed to be the beginning of something new, something bright. But instead, it was the day everything fell apart. I remember the vanilla cake. My mom, well, the woman I thought was my mom, had baked it early that morning. That alone should have tipped me off. She hadn't cooked anything from scratch since I was 9. But there it was, sitting on the kitchen counter like a peace offering. Sweet, soft, and completely out of place. The house felt different that day. Quieter. As if even the walls were bracing themselves for what was to come. My dad sat on the edge of the sofa, eyes distant, his fingers tightening around a coffee mug like it might shatter in his hands. Mom kept looking at her lap, her lips pressed so tightly together they'd turned white. Then came the words. Cold. Clinical. You were adopted. No emotion, no soft cushioning, just those 3 words, dropped like an anvil between us. You were 2 when we took you in, Dad added, as if that would help. Your birth mother couldn't care for you. Mom didn't say a word, just pushed a small, worn-out duffel bag toward me across the floor. Inside it were some clothes, a few bills, and a note with an address to a local youth hostel. We think it's time you find your own way, Dad said. Just like that, they were done with me. But here's what they didn't know. 3 weeks earlier, while cleaning out the attic, I found something they'd hidden. A loose floorboard near the old chimney creaked differently underfoot. Curiosity got the better of me, and when I pried it up, I discovered a sealed envelope wrapped in plastic. My name was on it, and underneath it, in a rushed, slanted handwriting, only open when you're ready to know. Inside was a letter and a birth certificate. The certificate listed my name, Isla Morgan. Mother, Dr. Serafina Ward. Father, unknown. But it was the letter that shook me to my core. My dearest Isla, if you're reading this, then fate has finally brought truth to the surface. I'm your mother. I loved you fiercely and never wanted to let you go, but forces bigger than me decided otherwise. I was silenced, discredited, and sent away. They said I was unwell. I wasn't. I saw things I wasn't supposed to see. I tried to expose something, babe, and they punished me for it. I don't know if I'm still alive as you read this, but please find the truth. You deserve to know who you are. With all my love, Mom. Serafina Ward. The name haunted me for weeks. That night, I searched every corner of the internet. Articles, medical boards, legal databases. Her name popped up in an old newspaper scan from 2005. Promising neurologist institutionalized after mental breakdown. But as I kept digging, a new story emerged. Dr. Serafina Ward had been a researcher at a neuroscience lab that closed under strange circumstances. Whispers of experimental procedures on vulnerable patients, mostly women. She'd attempted to blow the whistle. Days later, she was declared mentally unstable and committed to St. Vincent's long-term psychiatric care. The institution didn't exist anymore, and now, with a backpack of secrets, I stood in the hallway of the only home I'd ever known, staring at the people who had raised me like I was a stranger. I said thank you, I said goodbye, and I walked out. But I didn't walk away empty-handed. I had a name, I had a truth they thought I'd never find, and I had a mission. The hostel smelled like mold and floor polish. My room was a 6x8 box with a flickering ceiling light and a single bed that creaked when I sat down. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I pulled out my notebook and wrote everything I knew. Every date, every name, every connection. Then I opened the laptop I'd bought with summer job savings and logged into an anonymous Reddit account. There were whispers on forums, threads buried deep under usernames and VPNs, whistleblower discussions, conversations about hidden trials and silenced voices. One name came up more than once, the Ad Astra Project, a medical program that had promised revolutionary breakthroughs in memory, trauma, and cognition, shuttered in 2005 under ethical concerns. Serafina's name appeared in the acknowledgments of a leaked journal article, and then another. A user named Echo Glint posted, "Anyone know what happened to the whistleblower who tried to expose Ad Astra? She vanished." Some say she was never really crazy. I messaged the user. Her name was Serafina Ward. She's my mother. They didn't respond right away. But 2 days later, I received a message. If you want answers, come to Ashcroft Library, archive room. Ask for Theo. Don't trust anyone else. I packed my bag and left before sunrise. Ashcroft Library was a relic of an older time, dusty chandeliers, leather chairs, and a creaking spiral staircase. In the basement was the archive room, a vault of microfiche, newspaper clippings, and documents the world had long forgotten. Theo was a grad student working on a thesis about ethical violations in neuroscience. When I told him who I was, he didn't blink. "I've been waiting for someone like you," he said. Over the next 5 hours, Theo helped me sift through redacted files and buried reports. Names began to repeat: Halverson, Lint, Brenner, and always, somehow, they tied back to Ad Astra. He showed me an old ledger, donor records. My adoptive father's name was there. Not once, not twice, 14 times. He wasn't just a donor, he was one of them. My stomach turned. Theo handed me a stack of declassified pages. They used patients as test subjects, trialed memory suppression, cognitive modification. Your mother tried to stop them. I asked him if there was any way to find her. "Maybe," he said, "but you'll need to go further, St. Vincent's might have closed, but there's a successor institution, Redstone. Some say high-risk patients were transferred there. It's 3 states away, and it's not easy to get in." I stared at the map. This wasn't just about adoption anymore. It was about silence, about power, and a woman who'd been erased for telling the truth. I was going to find her, even if I had to dismantle everything in the process. The name buried in the archive. The wind howled outside the narrow hostel window that night, carrying the scent of exhaust and city dust. Lila sat on the thin mattress, cross-legged, the small duffel bag open before her. The dim yellow light above flickered as if trying to mimic the storm inside her chest. She held the envelope again, this time not just as a symbol of rebellion or truth, but as her anchor. Inside it were the names, the dates, and the piece of paper that started it all, a birth certificate with her name and a mother listed as Anya Morella. It was more than a name, it was the only clue to her real story. And as she pulled the crumpled sheet from the envelope for the 50th time, Lila whispered the name aloud. "Anya, who were you?" She wasn't afraid anymore, she was angry. She had spent years playing the role of the quiet girl, the obedient child, hiding in plain sight in a family that never really looked at her. Now, she had nothing left to lose, and everything to uncover. The next morning, she was at the public records office when the doors opened. The receptionist was a middle-aged woman with tired eyes and red-rimmed glasses. Lila approached, calm but determined. "Hi, I'm trying to find someone," she began, her voice steady. "Her name is Anya Morella. She might have been institutionalized about 18 years ago, possibly in connection with a place called St. Bellamy Medical Center." The woman gave her a long look. "That facility hasn't existed in over a decade, honey." "I know, but records have to exist somewhere, right?" The woman hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Most of the archives were transferred to the city storage facility, but it's a restricted file set, medical and legal crossover. You'll need clearance or, let's say, a very good reason." "I have one," Lila said firmly. "She's my mother." There was a moment of silence between them, an unspoken recognition in the woman's gaze. Without another word, she wrote something down and slipped the paper across the counter. "Go here. Ask for an archivist named Manny. Tell him Clarice sent you." Lila clutched the paper like it was gold. The city storage archive looked like a relic from a Cold War thriller. Gray concrete, blinking security cameras, and a front desk manned by a lanky man who looked like he hadn't slept in 3 days. "Manny," Lila said, walking up to the counter. "Clarice from Public Records sent me. She said you might help me find a file about a woman named Anya Morella." His eyes narrowed slightly. "Anya Morella? That's not a name I've heard in a long time." Lila held up the envelope with her birth certificate. "She's my biological mother." Manny sighed. "Follow me. But if anyone asks, you're my niece working on a school paper." They descended into the archive levels, the fluorescent lights humming overhead. Rows of rusted file cabinets loomed like tombstones. Manny stopped at one marked SBMC, Closed Facilities, 2000 to 2006. He opened it. "You're lucky. Most of this stuff is barely organized." Lila reached in and began flipping through. Her fingers trembled as she passed names, victims, patients, women. Then, finally, Morella, Anya, 2004. She pulled the file gently. The paper was yellowed, edges brittle. There was a faded photo of a young woman, dark curly hair, eyes like midnight. Lila's breath caught. She was beautiful. She looked like her. The intake report was brief. Patient admitted March 14th, 2004. Initial evaluation. Delusional disorder, persistent. Claims to have uncovered unethical experimentation by higher medical authorities. Observation required. No family listed. No known father of child. Birth pending. Lila's knees weakened. Birth pending? She whispered. Manny leaned over. She was pregnant when she was admitted. A soft ache bloomed in Lila's chest. That was me. She flipped to the last page. A transfer order. Patient transferred under emergency authority to Institution HS per request of Dr. Reginald A. Beckman. Reason: escalating delusions, security concerns, status, permanent care. Who's Dr. Beckman? Lila asked. Manny's face hardened. Beckman was one of the founding directors of St. Bellamy. Rumor says he was deep in something: black budget research, behavioral studies, some say military-backed. Behavioral studies? Lila echoed, a chill running down her spine. Manny nodded slowly. There's more to that facility than you'll find on paper. But HS? That's code. Not a real hospital. Probably a government site or private contractor facility. So she's still somewhere? Possibly. Manny's voice lowered. But if someone went to the trouble of removing her from the state system and hiding her under a fake facility code, it means they didn't want her found. Ever. Lila stared at the file. Her mother hadn't been unstable. She'd been silenced. And someone, somewhere, still had her. That night, back at the hostel, Lila locked the door, pulled down the shades, and opened her notebook again. She began to map everything. Names, places, dates. Anya Morella, St. Bellamy Medical. Dr. Beckman. Institution HS. Adoption records sealed. The name of her adoptive father listed as Andrew Carmichael. But she remembered something else. An email signature. A letter Andrew received months ago. She had only caught a glimpse on his phone. Reginald A. Beckman, Executive Director, Novex Behavioral Solutions. Novex. The pieces began to shift. She pulled up the company on the library computer the next morning. A private firm specializing in cognitive therapy, memory regression, behavior modification, highly funded, privately backed. And on the board, Dr. Reginald Beckman. Her blood ran cold. Her real mother had been locked away by a man now running a wellness institute with a squeaky clean public image. Just like Halverson in the original story she read weeks ago in the microfilm archive. This wasn't one case, it was a pattern. She dug deeper into Novex, dozens of sponsored programs. Behavioral training in correctional facilities, contracts with juvenile mental health centers, some under therapy, some under research. The common thread? All subjects came from vulnerable populations, poor, isolated, unwanted, just like her mother, just like Lila. That evening, Lila met with Manny again. She showed him what she found. His face paled. "You need to leave the hostel," he said firmly. "They have surveillance deals with half the city. If someone's watching Novex and you pinged their site and named this many times, they'll be on you soon." "Where do I go?" "My cousin runs a bookstore in the suburbs. Top floor has a tiny attic room. It's dusty, but no one will ask questions. You'll be safe." Lila nodded. "Thank you." Manny handed her a slip of paper. "And Lila," she turned, "whatever you find next, don't go in alone." The bookstore attic was small but cozy. Books were stacked high, the air smelled of paper and cinnamon, and the windows creaked like they hadn't been opened in years. It was perfect. There, in that small space above a quiet store, Lila began to build her case. Every document copied, every map redrawn. She even borrowed a secondhand scanner and began archiving the files Manny had helped her access. She gave it a code name, Project Echo, because her mother's truth, buried for years, was now echoing through her own life. And she wasn't going to stop until the world heard it. The voice behind the silence. The bookstore attic had become more than a safe house. It was Lila's war room. Stacks of printed articles, highlighted documents, and photographs filled the small space. Strings of red thread connected pins on a corkboard she found in the basement. Names and arrows. Anya Morella, Dr. Reginald Beckman, Novex Behavioral Solutions, Institution HS, and one that had begun to haunt her with increasing intensity. Andrew Carmichael, the man who had raised her, the man who called himself her father. Lila remembered his rigid routine, the same breakfast every morning, the exact train to work, the quiet dinners where conversation was optional and affection was foreign. But now, she questioned everything. Had he known who her mother really was? Was he involved in her disappearance? And if so, why raise Lila at all? She turned to the single photo she had of herself as a toddler. It had been buried in a keepsake box under Andrew's bed. The frame was silver, dusty, but lovingly kept. She wasn't smiling in the photo, just staring at the camera, solemn-eyed. Behind her, a figure, blurry, cropped at the waist. Not her adoptive mother. Definitely not Andrew. She scanned the image, digitally enhanced it, zoomed and studied. A bracelet. On the arm of the mystery figure, small initials engraved, R.B. Reginald Beckman. Lila's stomach twisted. It couldn't be. Was she part of the experiment? The next day, Lila bought a disposable phone. She used a burner SIM, prepaid in cash. Then she made a call she never thought she'd make. Hello? The voice on the other end was crisp, distant. Andrew? It's me. A pause. Lila. More silence. I need to talk to you, in person. He exhaled sharply. Why now? Because I know the truth, about Anya, about St. Bellamy, about Novex. Another long silence. Meet me tomorrow. The old observatory, noon. Come alone. The observatory sat atop a weathered hill, surrounded by leafless trees and wind that seemed to whisper forgotten secrets. Lila arrived first. She wore a wire, borrowed from Manny's cousin, and had a voice recorder in her bag. Her heart raced, but her expression remained unreadable. Andrew arrived 10 minutes later, older than she remembered. His face worn, suit wrinkled, but his eyes, still sharp, still guarded. You always were too smart for your own good, he said. Was that part of the program, or just parenting? He didn't answer. Lila stepped closer. Why did you take me? Why did you raise me? Andrew sat on the old stone ledge looking out at the forest. Because I owed her. Anya? He nodded. She was my colleague, my friend. We both started under Beckman. She believed the work we did could help people. I just followed orders. Lila clenched her fists. You helped them lock her away. No, I warned her. She didn't listen. She went public. Beckman made the call. I tried to get her out, but it was too late. The only thing I could do was make sure her daughter didn't become a lab rat. Lila's breath caught. They wanted to study you, track you from infancy. I signed papers, pulled strings, claimed guardianship. It was the only way. But you never told me. You let me believe she abandoned me. He turned to her, eyes glassy. I thought I was protecting you, from her pain, from mine. Lila stepped back. You were never protecting me. You were protecting them. He looked down. They're still watching, aren't they? Yes. Then help me. He met her eyes, stunned. Help you? Take them down. That night, Andrew returned with files. Not copies. Originals, memos, internal emails, subject reports with Lila's name on them, DNA logs, behavioral assessments masked as school performance evaluations. She read them all. Her entire childhood, every decision, every test score, every therapist visit had been part of a covert longitudinal study. But they underestimated one thing, Lila's will. She wasn't broken. She wasn't a victim. She was the evidence, the vault of silence. The next few days unfolded like pages from a dream Lila couldn't wake up from, a surreal blend of secrecy, revelations, and quiet courage. She found herself pacing endlessly in the worn-out corridor of the small motel room she had checked into, the ceiling light flickering above her like a blinking eye. In her hands, she clutched the folder her adoptive father, Gregory Langston, had left behind in his moment of regret. It was more than just a manila envelope. It was a Pandora's box. Inside were black and white photos, printed documents with redacted lines, a few letters written in a foreign hand, and a key, small, cold, and ancient-looking. The key was labeled in faded ink. Somerset Bank, box number 219. Her hands trembled as she turned the key over and over, wondering what vault of truth it might open. There was also a scribbled note. If you found this, I owe you the truth. Somerset holds the rest. That night, Lila lay in bed fully clothed, her shoes dangling off the edge. Her thoughts churned with half-formed theories and flickers of memory she had long buried under layers of survival instinct. She saw Gregory's tired eyes again, his voice barely more than a whisper. "I didn't save you. I hid you." The Somerset Bank was an old, discreet institution nestled in the historic quarter of New Haven. The building, like its clients, was well-preserved and secretive. Ivy clung to its brick walls, and brass plaques lined the dark wood doors inside. There were no bright signs or marketing posters. It was a place that existed for the old world, the quiet transactions of the powerful, and for stories that never reached daylight. Lila entered with resolve in her chest and doubt clinging to her ankles. The clerk, an older woman with silver hair neatly pulled into a French twist, barely raised an eyebrow when Lila presented the key. Instead, she nodded politely and guided her through a narrow hall to a private viewing room. Moments later, she returned with the box. The metal container was heavier than expected, its surface cold with time. Lila opened it slowly. There were stacks of files, a tape recorder, and a worn leather-bound journal. She reached for the journal first. The pages crackled with age. Inside, she recognized the handwriting. It was Elena Valenko's, her biological mother. March 2nd, 2003. They told me today that the clinic would be closed for restructuring, but I know what that means. Dr. Halverson is being shielded. The board is involved, and now they've threatened to reassign my cases. I've seen too much. I know too much. I can't keep quiet anymore. Page after page, Elena detailed her life at the experimental clinic where she once worked as a psychologist. She wrote about selective treatments, about how certain patients were chosen for deeper conditioning. She described the altered states, the tests, the tears. April 18th, 2003. I fear for the child. I know I'm pregnant, and I'm terrified they'll take the baby from me. I've documented everything, hidden it in various places. If one record is found, it might protect her. If not, God help us. Lila couldn't breathe. She moved next to the files, legal documents, medical forms, and something else. A sealed document with a logo she recognized, Halverson Foundation. She cracked it open. It was an internal memo, marked confidential. Subject 47 AG has been successfully placed with Asset Brenner Langston. All prior files redacted. Continued monitoring advised. Reassessment at age 18 recommended. Her name, her code. Her placement wasn't adoption, it was an assignment. The tape recorder was last. With trembling fingers, Lila pushed the play button. A man's voice filtered through the static. Calm, calculated. Subject 47 shows promising cognitive resilience. Behavioral analysis confirms adaptive empathy patterns. Recommend continuation in controlled family environment. Father figure will report monthly. Then a woman's voice, barely audible. You're playing God. These children aren't projects, they're human. They are opportunities, the man responded coldly. Lila dropped the device. Everything she thought she knew about herself, her history, her trauma, her family, was a lie. She wasn't adopted out of compassion. She was harvested, studied, placed. Her hands clenched into fists, the wave of nausea nearly knocking her over. But then, another feeling crept in. Fire. This was no longer about identity. It was about justice. Back at the motel, Lila sat on the floor, surrounded by every piece of evidence. She created piles, personal history, Elena's journal, corporate documents, audio tapes, legal files. She began scanning everything, uploading the images into encrypted cloud storage. She created a map on her laptop, pinning every known name and location, the clinic, the foundation, the psychiatrists, the funding sources, and now, Somerset Bank. She didn't sleep, she didn't eat. Every second wasted was a second someone else might be lost. She wondered how many more subjects there were. How many girls like her never found their records, never escaped the illusion of a family built to study them. She remembered Gregory's words again. You were the only one I couldn't unsee. Maybe that was his truth. But it wasn't enough. She needed a partner, someone who had navigated dark institutions before, someone who had survived the edge, and she knew exactly who to call, Rachel Ashby. They met in a rest stop parking lot halfway between New Haven and Albany. Rachel looked older, more weathered, but her eyes were fierce as ever. Lila showed her the journal first, then the files, then played the tape. Rachel listened without interruption. When the recorder clicked off, she leaned back in her seat and exhaled. We've found the spine, she said. Now we build the body. Rachel began drafting a multi-tiered strategy. Release Elena's journal as a serialized podcast narrated by Lila herself. leak the documents anonymously to select investigative outlets, and prepare a protected legal file to submit to a class action law firm specializing in systemic abuse. Lila hesitated. It's my mother's voice. My life. My trauma. Am I ready to tell the world? Rachel placed a hand on her shoulder. You don't have to be ready. You just have to be brave. Lila nodded. She would be both. The episode went live 3 days later. It was called Subject 47, The Girl in the Vault. Within 48 hours, it reached 2 million downloads. Listeners flooded the inbox with stories of their own, of institutions that felt too quiet, of families too scripted. Investigative reporters followed the breadcrumbs, tracing funding from the Halverson Foundation to public universities, hospitals, even political campaigns. Whistleblowers began coming forward. And far away, in a silent facility surrounded by pine trees, a nurse slipped a thumb drive into a drawer she thought she'd never open again. It was just the beginning, because the vault had been opened, and the silence would never return. The edge of the spiral. The rain started the same night Ava received the second letter. A soft drizzle at first, tapping like cautious fingertips against her motel window, then escalating into a ceaseless downpour. The storm outside was nothing compared to the one within her. The envelope had been slid under her door. No stamp, no return address. Just a trembling piece of paper that read, "You are not the first to ask questions. Be careful. They don't forget." No signature, no further details, just dread. Ava barely slept. Her mind spun with questions she didn't know how to articulate. Who else had asked questions? What had happened to them? And who were they? By morning, the motel felt too small, too close. She needed space to think, to breathe. So she walked, past the grocery store with the flickering sign, past the diner where the waitress always smiled a little too long, as if Ava's presence confused her. She ended up at the edge of the park, the same one her adoptive parents used to bring her to when she was little, back when she believed their love was simple, unconditional. Back before the letter, back before the storm. At the library, Ava sat cross-legged in front of the town archives, her fingers dusty from flipping through old municipal records. She wasn't looking for anything in particular, and yet, she was looking for everything. Something to stitch the pieces together. Her adoption, the psychiatric facility her birth mother had been confined to, the chilling silence that surrounded it all. Then, a whisper of a clue. A headline buried in the local obituaries section from 15 years ago. Local journalist Claire Densmore reported missing after investigative probe. Claire had been a grad student at the state university. She was researching closed psychiatric facilities and women's mental health in state-run institutions. She'd gone missing 3 months after visiting Silver Point Psychiatric Hospital, the very place Ava's birth mother had been committed. The article mentioned Claire had spoken to family about unusual encounters and suspicions of surveillance. Ava shivered. This was the second time someone connected to Silver Point had vanished. Back at her motel, Ava spread everything she had across the bed. Newspaper clippings, handwritten notes, the original adoption records she'd secretly photocopied, and her mother's letter, the one she'd found hidden in her adoptive father's study weeks before her 18th birthday, the one they didn't know she had. Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "Meet me at the Overlook, 9 p.m. Bring the envelope. Come alone." Panic clawed at her throat. She thought of ignoring it, but something deeper urged her to go, because whoever this was, they knew. About the envelope. About her search. The Overlook stood at the edge of town, overlooking a dry creek bed and an endless stretch of forest. Wind howled like warnings between the trees as Ava stood beneath the flickering street lamp. 9:03. No one. Then a figure stepped out from the shadows. He was young, maybe late 20s, tall, gaunt, with hollow eyes and a voice barely above the wind. "You must be Ava." She didn't answer. "My name is Mason. Claire Densmore was my sister." Ava's breath caught. "She never came home. She sent me her notes a week before she disappeared, told me to keep them hidden, that if anything happened, someone else might come looking, that someone was you." He handed her a flash drive. "Everything she found is on here. Interviews, reports, hospital memos, and names. People in your town, people with influence. Your family name is on there." Ava backed away, overwhelmed. "Why me? Why now?" "Because they know you're close. And because the closer you get, the more dangerous it becomes." That night, Ava couldn't sleep. She lay on the lumpy motel bed, staring at the ceiling, the flash drive cold in her hand. Every instinct told her she should run. Instead, she opened her laptop. Files loaded, dozens of them. One folder stood out. Subject, E. Rivers, her birth mother. The first document was a psychological evaluation. Subject exhibits signs of trauma, paranoia, and dissociative episodes. Recommends prolonged observation in isolated quarters. But the notes were contradictory. In the margins, someone had scribbled, "No diagnosis prior to Silver Point admission. Intelligence, high. Empathy, strong." Another file, a series of scanned handwritten letters from E. Rivers to a child. They were never sent. "My dearest Ava, if you ever find this, it means you've begun to see the world for what it is. I wanted to tell you so much, but they took you before I could. They said I was unstable because I asked questions, because I found out what they were doing. They weren't healing women, they were testing them, breaking them." Ava wiped a tear. Her mother had been silenced, and now they were trying to do the same to her. She printed the documents, all of them, then packed her things. She couldn't stay in the motel. She had to move, again, fast. But before she left, she called a number she hadn't dialed in years. Her adoptive father answered. "Ava, what do you want?" Her voice was ice. "The truth, and I'm not asking this time." He sighed, a long, heavy exhale. "Come home. We need to talk." Her heart pounded. "Then talk." Silence. Then he whispered, "Not over the phone. They're listening." Ava sat still, phone still pressed to her ear, even after the call ended. Her hands trembled, but not with fear, with resolve. She was going back, to the house where the lies started, where the truth had been buried under vanilla cake and soft smiles, and this time she wouldn't leave without answers. The hidden files and a dangerous choice. The morning sunlight seeped through the moth-bitten curtains of the roadside motel where Avery had been hiding. Dust particles floated in the still air, catching in the golden light, but she couldn't appreciate the calm. She hadn't slept. Her body was present, but her mind had been racing all night, combing through every single detail, every uncovered document, and every memory that could help her make sense of what had happened, and what she was about to do next. In her hands was a USB drive. Black, nondescript, and worn at the edges, it held more than just digital files. It held secrets that could unravel reputations, break institutions, and finally free her real mother. But at what cost? She stared down at her phone. Her inbox had begun to flood with responses, some encouraging, some threatening. Independent journalists, podcast hosts, a former employee of Halcyon Wellness named Marion Collins. That name stood out. Marion claimed she had once been a medical tech at the now-defunct Elmhurst Clinic, and she remembered Avery's mother. She wanted to meet. Avery hesitated. Could she be trusted? Could anyone? But then her phone buzzed again. It was a message from Rachel. "Need backup? I'm in town. Send location. We do this together." Rachel Ashby had been Avery's strongest ally since the story broke wide open. She was a former investigative reporter who had lost everything for chasing the truth, and now she'd risk it all again to help Avery shine a light on what had been buried for decades. They met in a quiet cafe across town. The place was mostly empty, just the occasional traveler and an older man reading a newspaper. Rachel looked rough but determined, her eyes sharper than ever. "You sure about this woman, Marion?" she asked, sipping the weak diner coffee. "No," Avery admitted, "but she knew too many things no one else could have known. Details about my mother, how she used to hum when she was nervous, the scar above her left eyebrow. That's either a very good sign or a very dangerous one. Either way, we need to be prepared." Rachel laid out her laptop and clicked through encrypted folders. They reviewed the documents they'd recovered, copies of internal memos, patient records, experimental protocols labeled with code names like Project Selene and Behavioral Variant Series D. Every line read like a horror story disguised as science. One document in particular made Avery's skin crawl. It was titled, Subject 113A, Postnatal Observation. The subject listed was Elena Vaughn, her mother, and under the notes section the text read, Child removed within 48 hours. Intended for observational fostering. Subject exhibited signs of dissociation upon removal. No sedation required. Compliance achieved through chemical regulation. Observational fostering. They had taken Avery not to protect her, but to study her, to observe her development as a child raised away from her mother under controlled conditions. Her entire life had been part of a test. Rachel's hand gently touched her arm. "Avery, are you okay?" But Avery's expression was hard now. "I don't think I've ever been okay, but I'm done playing nice." Marion suggested meeting in the park outside the Old City Archives building, a place public enough to discourage danger, but quiet enough to talk. She was older than Avery expected, probably in her 60s, with a no-nonsense presence. Her gray hair was pulled into a bun, and her gaze was firm, but not unkind. "I remember your mother," she said without introduction. "Smart, strong, too strong. They don't like that in women, especially not ones who ask too many questions." She pulled out a manila envelope. "I took this the night they shut Elmhurst down. I knew they'd erase everything, but I couldn't forget what they did." Inside were Polaroids, grainy, old photos of hallways, exam rooms, patient logs scribbled in red ink, and one photo of a young woman in a hospital gown standing near a barred window. "That's Elena," Marion said, 2 weeks before they transferred her. Avery took the photo in her hands, heart pounding. Her mother looked tired but not broken. Not yet. "They wanted her gone. You know that, right?" "Yes," Avery said softly. "And I need to bring her back." The plan formed fast. Too fast, perhaps, but time was a luxury they couldn't afford. Rachel and Avery would release everything, every file, photo, audio log, and report, but not all at once. A coordinated strategic campaign, a digital storm. They'd time the first wave with a podcast drop, then follow it up with exclusive leaks to 2 journalists, timed videos, social media blasts, and whistleblower statements from 2 former staff members now under protection. But before that, Avery had one last thing to do. She returned to Ridgewell Psychiatric Center. This time, she wasn't visiting as a daughter. She came as an advocate, a threat. Armed with files and backed by a legal team working pro bono thanks to Rachel's network, Avery demanded Elena's immediate release and a formal reevaluation of her mental health status. The administrator at Ridgewell, a lean man with tired eyes, tried to stall, tried to deflect. But when Avery slid the folder across the table, his hands trembled. "You'll have to give us 72 hours, he stammered. "You have 48, Avery said. "Then the next file goes public." And then she left. 2 days later, Elena Vaughn walked out of Ridgewell Psychiatric Center in a borrowed coat and hospital slippers. Her eyes scanned the horizon as if unsure what was real. But when they met Avery's, no words were needed. They embraced like a memory trying to rebuild itself. "You found me," Elena whispered. "I never stopped looking," Avery replied. The following days moved in a blur. News broke. Journalists dug deeper. Protests erupted outside former Halcyon-funded clinics. A congressional hearing was called. Subpoenas were served. And Thomas Halverson, now exposed as the orchestrator of decades of psychological abuse, vanished. Some said he fled the country. Others said he'd been silenced by his own. But Avery didn't care, because for the first time, she wasn't surviving. She was living. She and Elena rented a small house in the suburbs, quiet, unassuming. Together they planted a garden, tomato vines, lavender, basil, and hope. Avery took a job at a community legal center helping victims of institutional abuse. She wasn't a lawyer, not yet, but she'd get there. Rachel stayed close, helping publish a book about the case, donating the profits to a foundation Avery created in Claire Rothman's name, an aspiring journalist who never got to tell her story. But her voice lived on in Avery's. One evening, Avery sat on the porch as the sun dipped below the trees. Elena came out with 2 cups of tea and sat beside her. "Do you regret anything?" Elena asked. Avery thought for a long moment. "Only that it took me so long to see the truth." "And now?" Avery smiled, staring out into the darkening sky. "Now I make sure no one else lives in the dark." The past had stolen her innocence, her security, even her identity. But it gave her something too. A purpose, a voice, and a truth no one could ever bury again. Voices in the silence. The rain fell in a steady rhythm that night, tapping softly against the diner window as if echoing the thoughts storming inside Iris's mind. She hadn't slept more than 2 hours in days. Not since the leak. Not since the world discovered what the Halverson Foundation had done, and what Thomas Langley, the man she once called father, had hidden for nearly 2 decades. Iris clutched her cup of coffee with both hands, not for the caffeine but for the warmth. Across the table sat Rachel Morrow, the former investigative journalist who had helped Iris bring everything to light. Rachel looked exhausted, but her eyes were alight with a kind of fire that Iris couldn't quite name. They had spent the past 2 days fielding calls from lawyers, victims' families, and media outlets. Iris wasn't ready for fame. She hadn't done any of this for attention. She had done it for her mother, her real mother. "Do you think she'll ever forgive herself?" Iris asked quietly, her voice barely audible above the hum of the diner. "For being silent so long?" Rachel didn't answer right away. She stirred her tea, thoughtful. "You mean Elena, or you?" The question hit Iris in a place she hadn't let herself explore. For so long she had directed her anger outward, at Thomas, at the foundation, at everyone who had hurt Elena. But what about the guilt inside her? The what-ifs? What if she had found that letter a year earlier? What if she'd never gone digging at all? Would Elena still be suffering in silence? They had moved Elena into a private care facility shortly after the media firestorm began. It was safer that way. The state had opened a formal investigation into Silver Hollow and Ridgewell Behavioral Center. Patients had begun speaking up. Journalists were swarming the property. Elena's health, fragile as it was, couldn't withstand that kind of pressure. Not yet. "She's still recovering," Rachel said finally. "Forgiveness takes time. So does healing." Iris nodded slowly. That word, healing, felt both foreign and familiar, like a song she once loved but hadn't heard in years. The next morning she drove to the care center. It was tucked away in the countryside, far from the noise. A wide field surrounded the stone building, and a small greenhouse stood behind it, where some of the patients gardened in the mornings. Elena had always liked quiet places. Iris remembered reading that in her journals. Elena was sitting on the porch, wrapped in a thick cardigan, her silver-streaked hair braided loosely down her back. She looked up as Iris approached, her face softening into something resembling peace. "You came early," she said. "I couldn't sleep." "Neither could I. Too many memories in the dark." They sat together for a long moment, the silence between them neither heavy nor hollow. It was the kind of silence that spoke its own language. "I wanted to ask you something," Iris said, breaking the stillness. "Do you remember Claire Roth?" Elena's eyes grew distant. "Yes. Brave. Too brave. She was one of the last to visit me before they moved me to Ridgewell. I think they made her disappear." "They tried," Iris said. "But she survived. She's alive." Elena turned, her expression unreadable. "You found her?" "Rachel did. We met. She wants to help build something. A center. For women who went through what you did. A place that's not about silence." Elena looked away, eyes misting. "And you? What will you do, Iris?" It was a question Iris had been avoiding. Exposing the truth had become her mission, her identity. But what came after justice? What was left when the monster had been named? "I want to make noise," she said. "I want to turn silence into something that can't be ignored." She didn't know how yet. Maybe through writing, or speaking, or helping other girls like Claire and herself find their voice. But she knew this. She wasn't done. Later that evening, Iris met with Claire in a quiet co-working space. The once missing journalist had returned from the shadows, weary but alive, determined to do something that mattered. They spent hours drafting outlines, mapping out a vision. A digital archive of survivor stories, anonymous or public, verified, protected, and accessible. "No one should ever feel like they're crazy for telling the truth," Claire said. "And no one should ever feel alone for surviving it," Iris added. Their platform, they decided, would be called Echoes. It began modestly. A handful of testimonies, a few scanned documents, a video message from Elena that she had recorded on a good day. It wasn't dramatic, just her voice, calm and slow, explaining what she remembered and what she wanted the world to understand. And people listened. They received emails from across the country, some from former patients, others from nurses who had seen too much, even a retired administrator who had worked under Halverson and finally wanted to confess. One letter, written in trembling script, simply read, "I never thought anyone would believe me. I thought I was the only one. Thank you." Within weeks, Echoes was being covered by national media. Rachel re-emerged as a source. Claire began speaking on podcasts. Iris, still hesitant about cameras, agreed to speak on one condition, that Elena be credited as the foundation of everything. The world didn't change overnight, but it shifted. Iris returned to the care center that weekend. She brought her laptop, opened Echoes, and played Elena her video. Elena watched in silence. Then, tears. "I never thought my voice would matter," she whispered. "It always did," Iris said. "They just made you forget." The wind carried the scent of lavender from the greenhouse, and in that moment, everything felt possible. Full circle. I used to believe that the truth would feel like freedom, that once I exposed everything, once the world saw what they had done, justice would follow. Maybe that was naive. Maybe I had to be naive to get this far. But what I never expected was peace. It started on a quiet Tuesday morning, 6 months after the leaks. The sun had just begun to warm the windows of the small apartment I shared with Elena. Not a hospital, not a center, a real home. Elena was sitting at the table, slowly flipping through an old photo album I'd found at a thrift store. It had nothing to do with our past, but she liked the feel of it, the weight of it, the idea that memories could be held. She didn't say much most mornings. Some days were better than others, but her silence no longer frightened me. I'd come to know it wasn't emptiness, it was reflection. I was just finishing up an email to Rachel when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I stared at it for a moment. I didn't answer. Instead, I let it go to voicemail. I'd learned to trust my instincts, and they told me that if it mattered, they'd leave a message. They did. When I pressed play, a voice from the past filled the room. "This is Claire Rothman. I think you've been looking for me." I dropped the phone. Elena looked up, startled. "Are you okay?" she asked gently. I nodded, breathless. "She's alive." Claire. The girl who tried before me. The girl who disappeared. The girl they erased. Except they didn't. Rachel and I made the trip together 2 days later. Claire lived under a new name now, in a town so small the library still used card catalogs. She had hollow eyes and a nervous laugh, but when she saw us, something inside her lit up again, like a pilot light that had nearly gone out. We talked for hours, about Ridgeview, Silver Birch, the foundation. She'd run, yes, but she never forgot. She'd been waiting for someone to finish what she started. Now she wasn't waiting anymore. Together, we built something. We called it the Aurora Network, named not for the past, but for the future. A network of whistleblowers, survivors, advocates. A digital archive of untold truths protected by decentralized encryption, impossible to erase. Rachel worked her contacts. Claire handled security. I told the stories. And the stories came. Women from across the country, former patients, daughters, journalists, nurses. One by one, the silence broke. Sometimes it was a whisper, sometimes it was a scream. But we listened to them all. And one day, the world did too. I stood outside the courthouse in D.C., heart pounding, watching as news vans lined the street. The air was cold, but the energy was electric. Cameras pointed in every direction. Protesters held signs. Some cheered. Others demanded answers. Thomas Brenner's trial had finally begun. He was flanked by lawyers, his face pale and tight. I watched him from across the plaza. He didn't see me at first, but then his eyes scanned the crowd and stopped. Right on me. I didn't flinch. He was no longer the towering figure from my childhood, no longer the man who decided my fate like a puppeteer with strings. He was just a man, and this time, he couldn't hide behind foundations or closed-door settlements. Elena refused to come. She didn't want to see him again. But I testified for both of us. In that courtroom, I told our story. Not just the science fiction horror of unethical experiments, not just the conspiracies and cover-ups, but the quiet parts too. The moment I found her, the moment she remembered me, the years they stole, and the hope we still carried. I watched the jury. I saw the shift in their eyes. Not pity, not confusion, understanding. And when the verdict came in, guilty on all counts, I didn't cry. I didn't cheer. I just breathed. For the first time in years, I breathed without the weight of secrets pressing down. Months passed. Spring came again, soft and sweet. Elena took up gardening. She planted herbs in chipped ceramic pots along our balcony. Basil, lavender, rosemary. She said the smells made her feel real again. I started writing full-time, not articles, not exposés, books. The first was called The House They Tried to Burn. It wasn't just about us. It was about every voice we had found, every whisper that became a roar. Claire wrote the foreword. Rachel wrote the epilogue. Elena read every page, slowly, over time. She said she was proud, not just of me, but of herself, for surviving. One afternoon, she sat beside me and asked, "Do you think they'll ever build something like Silver Birch again?" I thought about it. Then I said, "They already have, just not with the same name." She nodded. "But now people know to look," I added. "And when they find it, they won't be alone." On the anniversary of my 18th birthday, I went back to the house I grew up in. Not to confront them, not to rage, just to see. The windows were dark. The lawn was overgrown. A for sale sign hung crooked in the yard. I stood there for a long time. I remembered the smell of that vanilla cake, the coldness in Dad's voice, the way Mom couldn't meet my eyes. I used to think that day broke me. Now I know it remade me. As I turned to leave, a neighbor walking a dog paused beside me. She squinted. "You're Nora, aren't you? From the news?" I hesitated. "Yes," she smiled gently. "I read your book. I have a daughter your age." "Thank you for being brave." I nodded, throat tight. "Thank you for seeing me." That night, I sat by the window with Elena. The sky was ink black, scattered with stars. She was humming softly, some lullaby I never learned. And for the first time, I felt something I never expected. Peace. It didn't come from revenge. It came from truth. It came from choosing not to be broken. From lighting a candle in a tunnel, not because it was dark, but because I knew others were still in it. And I was going to help them find the way out. Because this was never just my story. It was every girl they silenced, every mother they caged, every voice they tried to erase. But we are louder now. We are the echo they can't outrun. We are the truth, and we are just getting started. And if you were Nora, what would you have done that day you turned 18? Comment below. Do you believe the truth always comes out in the end? Subscribe for more raw, emotional stories that speak to the heart.